Okay, good afternoon to everybody joining online. I see people coming in. Buenos dias for those in Latin America. Good afternoon for people on the east side of Europe. And welcome to you all. We will start in a few minutes and we'll wait 2 or 3 minutes for everybody to join. Okay, good afternoon again to everybody. I see slowly some more people coming in. So let's wait 1 more minute and then we'll start the webinar. Yes, so Catalina is also giving the instructions for those that want Spanish translation. Entonces, para los que quieren la traducción en español, pueden tener la traducción poniendo en el botón abajo en la pantalla para obtener la traducción en español. Okay, good afternoon to everybody. I think we will start in half a minute. And yeah, so those that want Spanish translation, there is Spanish translation simultaneously. Push the button in the lower part of your screen to get the Spanish translation. Okay, well, let's start. So welcome to you all. Welcome to all the participants. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Jeroen Vos. I work as associate professor with the Water Resources Management Group at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And I use a political ecology lens to study contested water resources management and contested knowledges about water, mainly in Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. And today is the 9th appointment of the thematic seminar series as part of the NEWAVE Diffused conference, which started at the beginning of April and will be accompanying us until the end of the year with bi-weekly online webinars. The thematic seminars feature the NEWAVE early stage researchers who will guide us through the key water governance aspects that they have been investigating during the NEWAVE project. Today's seminar will start with Hannah Porada's lecture entitled From Place-Based Resistance Against Extractivism to Translocal Environmental Justice Struggles. Hannah is currently a PhD researcher based at the University of Amsterdam. Her research interests relate to critical geography, political ecology, environmental justice, water governance, and social movement struggles against extractivism. You will learn more about her and her work throughout the presentation. Together with Hannah, we welcome the invited discussants, Guadalupe Garcia Prado and Dr. Nienke Buscher. Guadalupe is an anthropologist and the director of the Extractive Industries Observatory in Guatemala. From a multidisciplinary approach, she has conducted research to support local communities in their demands against the state and mining corporations. With a desire to contribute to the democratization of information and knowledge, she strives to address extractivism with an ethical political commitment rooted in permanent reflection and learning. Dr. Nienke Buscher is a researcher and coordinator of a knowledge platform studying the societal impact of gas extraction in Groningen. The platform is embedded in the University of Groningen, the Netherlands. The goal of the platform is to give a broad overview of the consequences of the gas extraction in Groningen, propose ways to restore the broken relationship between stakeholders, and draw and implement lessons from this case study for other mining activities elsewhere. With these insights, the platform seeks to bridge the gap between science, policy, and practice. Nienke defended her PhD in 2018 on land grabbing in Argentina, being interested in the livelihood impacts of extractive industries, governance, state civil society collaborations, and environmental justice. I kindly remind you that you can submit your questions anytime during the seminar using the Q&A function. Thank you so much for joining enjoy the seminar. So we have a time schedule, and I will first invite Hannah for her presentation. It will take about 25 minutes. And then I will invite Nienke and Guadalupe for a reaction to that presentation of 5 minutes each. And then I invite Hannah to give a reaction to those reactions, also 5 minutes. And then the floor will be open for questions, the Q&A. So you can put your questions during the presentations and the reactions in the Q&A button. And then Hannah or the invited discussants will respond to them. Okay, thank you all for joining. And the floor is yours, Hannah.
Yes, thank you, Jeroen, for the introduction, and also welcome to all participants from my side. And I would also like to express my gratitude to Nienke and Guadalupe for being here with us and sharing their reflections later on. Just bear with me a second while I share my screen. Can you see it? The PowerPoint? Okay. So my presentation today is titled From Place-Based Resistance Against Extractivism to Translocal Environmental Justice Struggles. And this presentation is based on my ongoing PhD research that I'm hoping to conclude so soon. And I guess Jeroen, as one of my supervisors, hopes so too. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the many people that have supported my research, because I know some of them are here today. So thank you for your ongoing support. And to start off my presentation, I would like to explain how my research came about and what sparked my interest in the topic. So a few years back, I researched the injustices and contestations around brown coal mining in Germany and the resettlements that go along with them, close to my own home, actually. And there were heavy resistance struggles going on at the time, but also over decades. And the movements in Germany, they were really actively building alliances with other struggles, with wider national and international movements. And I was then curious to sort of also understand other extractive conflicts and place-based struggles against extractivism. And so I embarked on my research journey, trying to understand what was going on in Groningen, in the Netherlands, and in Quetzaltenango. That said, my presentation today has basically two parts. So on the one hand, I'm interested to understand the processes of extractive territorialization and the contestation struggles, both in the Netherlands and in Guatemala. And on the other hand, I'm interested to explore the theme of translocal justice bridges and how they can be built between different place-based struggles against extractivism. I'm going to focus on the first part now, And here I'm going to ask how extractive industries, territorial interventions, and their contestation have transformed territories in Groningen and in Quetzaltenango. And to respond to that question, I would first like to take you to Groningen. Groningen is a province in the northeastern Netherlands, and here I'm going to explore the case of gas extraction with you. So in Groningen, we are talking about Europe's biggest underground gas field, actually, and gas here has been extracted since 1963 through a public-private partnership between the Dutch state and two fossil fuels, Royal Dutch Shell and ExxonMobil, who formed a joint venture that is called NAM. And for a long time, this gas extraction was pretty much went on unquestioned. And you can see here a monument that was put up 50 years after discovery of the Groningen field to sort of celebrate the gas as bringing great wealth to the Netherlands. And there were just a very few individuals at the time who, in retrospect, are called whistleblowers, who raised concerns about the place-based consequences of the gas extraction. At the time, they were really ridiculed by the extractive actors and alliances. And the gas has been really prominent because obviously there were massive revenues made from it. So only from the Groningen field until 2022, we are talking about 363 billion euros. And they went into welfare spending across the Netherlands, but it must be said that the revenues were really, really unevenly distributed. So really a very small share, between 1% and 3%, went back to Groningen, and most was invested in the economic centers. And in Groningen, the gas extraction has had major consequences. So on the one hand, it has led to gas quakes, who I call gas quakes to really distinguish them from tectonic quakes and to stress their human-made or extractive-made characters. And over 1,686 gas quakes happened until last week. I looked up the number, and you can see that here in the counter mapping tool that is put up by one of the social movements in Groningen. And the gas quakes, they have led to damage of thousands of houses. The compensation policies have been really messy and created a lot of inequalities and also tensions between people. And on top of that, they've also led to really unsafe living situations. So people were at times not safe to live in their houses anymore. And so the psychological desperation has been also really intense, and all of that has led to really profound political distrust. And if you're interested to know more about this, please also refer to the work that Nienke and her colleagues are doing in Groningen on this. And so these gas quakes, they have been heavily contested. And actually, after decades of political struggle, there has also been a parliamentary investigation, which is the heaviest political accountability instrument in the Netherlands. And it concluded in 2023, saying that there had been a decade-long systemic failure at all levels, and that the interest of the Groningers had been deliberately neglected for the sake of monetary profits. Now, next to the gas quakes, the gas extraction has also led to land subsidence. And by land subsidence, I refer to an irreversible downwards motion of the soil. So that means that the whole area is sort of sinking, and it's often said that that's a natural process everywhere in the Netherlands, but in Groningen actually a big part is really related to the gas extraction. And that has major implications for the water systems in the area. The original drainage system draining the water from the land to the sea has been annulled. The water infrastructure had to be adjusted. That has increased operational costs. And there's also a suspected link between the land subsidence, the adjustment of water levels, and damages to private houses. And as I started to investigate this issue, I noticed how that issue was not really talked about. It seemed depoliticized. And what I mean by depoliticized is that a profoundly political problem was reduced to the technical realm. And there was a strong sort of belief in expert solutions. And why it matters to look at this process of depoliticization is really because the unequal power relations behind that serve some interest over others had sort of become invisible. And so that sparked sort of my curiosity, especially in the stark contrast to the gas quakes, because both were part of the same overarching extractive territorialization. And what we did with Jeroen and also with Ruth Hurt in our paper on Groningen is to really look at expert knowledge and expert truths and how they have worked to depoliticize the land subsidence in Groningen and how they have failed to depoliticize the gas quakes. And our argument is that the technical approach or the depoliticized approach to land subsidence is nonetheless a reflection of the subtle reordering and takeover of territorial control by the extractive actors. And what we also show is that the depoliticization is really contingent. So actually, if you dig a little bit under the surface of subsidence, you find scattered doubts and criticisms about how the whole issues have been solved among water professionals, among local politicians, among inhabitants, social movement members, and they criticize the techno fix to land subsidence. And in relation to the gas quake, it has sort of been a really long political struggle to counter these expert truths and to expose the limits of expert knowledge, and they haven't worked to depoliticize the gas quakes, as I have shown. And for me, that is sort of also symbolized through this counter monument that was put up in Groningen, sort of in response to the first photo I showed you. That also shows all the cracks that have been left behind in Groningen by the gas extraction in people's houses, but also in people's hearts and minds and relationships. Moving from the Netherlands and Europe quite far to Central America, I would now like to take you to Quetzaltenango, which is Guatemala's second largest city in the country's western highlands. And here, more specifically, I'm taking you to the Palajunoj Valley, which is a peri-urban rural area in Quetzaltenango, and which you can also see on the photo here. And this Palajunoj Valley is home to 10 indigenous communities who identify as Maya Quiche. And they have sort of experienced several territorial changes over the past decades. One of them being that since 1999, large-scale mining companies entered their territory to extract sand, gravel, and pumice stones to produce construction materials. And there are different companies that operate in the valley. They all operate under different names, but actually they're all linked to the same cement monopoly called Cementos Progresos, and that's linked to one of the elite families of the country. And if you're interested to know more about the licenses, but also these powerful mining networks, please also refer to the work that Guadalupe's organization is doing. So the mining companies, they entered the valley, they have evaded formal rules, there were no proper consultations conducted, and the law sort of really worked to shield powerful interests. And the large-scale mining is sort of legitimized by this discourse around this responsible mining. It said that responsible mining is possible if the consequences are technically managed. And there's also this promotion of a belief in that mining can bring local benefits. So what you can see here in the photo is how a foundation linked to the elite family I have been mentioning offers female empowerment workshops in the valley in order to sort of reproduce this discourse around local benefits. Yet the communities in the valley, they have been really active in denouncing these practices as strategies of contestation. They also decry the environmental degradation that mining brings about in terms of soil erosion, deforestation, flooding issues, and so on. And they also experience major health issues because there are a lot of explosions in the mines, and that sort of brings these respiratory issues for people. And also the impact in people's everyday life is really heavy. Now, the mining is not the only issue at play in the valley, and it happens against an already tense backdrop around wider urban-rural tensions and around a conflict over authority between the indigenous organizations in the valley and the municipality of Quetzaltenango that is urban-based. And one manifestation of this tension is the issue of waste disposal, which you can see here on the picture, because the municipality discharges massive amounts of waste without further treating it in the indigenous territory. And then they also, at the same time, experience a lack of municipal service. So many people don't have access to water and electricity, for instance. And also parts of the valley are repeatedly flooded. So there's really a drainage systems that don't work, which would be the role of the municipality. And the flooding is also seen to be related to the mining, because the mining happens in the hill slopes of the area of the valley. And so the water retaining areas, they are sort of decreasing. And on top of that, there's also the issue of a territorial ordering plan, which is a new logic of municipal spatial governance that the municipality of Quetzaltenango has been trying to implement for some years now. And they sort of present this as an efficient instrument that would ensure urban sustainable development and that would reorganize municipal space in an efficient way. And there's much to say about it, but one major contradiction of this territorial ordering plan is that the territorial ordering plan is really blind to the mining issues. And so it's sort of these territorial ordering techniques, they coincide with the extractive territory making that goes on in the valley. Now there have been decade-long and repeated contestations by inhabitants about what's going on, and different indigenous organizations, they try to articulate these territorial issues in order to defend their territory and to claim their territorial autonomy. And sometimes they do so in alliance with urban-based movements, other times not. And they draw on different strategies to defend their territory. So sometimes they draw on official legal systems, but sometimes they also put forward their customary laws. And then they also have been repeatedly organizing protest actions to sort of show what's going on in their territory. But at the same time, these mobilization strategies, they're sort of difficult to maintain. On the one hand, because the legal systems are dysfunctional and oftentimes co-opted, so they fail to guarantee fundamental rights of people. And also there have been threats and also instances of violence against protesters, and several protesters have been criminalized in recent years. And at the same time, there's also the issue of micropolitics. So there are contradictions and tensions within the indigenous resisting movements, but also among resisting actors. And something I argue in that regard is that it's important to acknowledge these differences and tensions, and that is sort of the political starting point if we think about the strengthening of movements that can be unified, but they don't have to be uniform, and really thinking about plural movements. So this brings me to the second part of my presentation, thinking back to the opportunities and challenges of the resistance struggles in Quetzaltenango, and also thinking back to the Groninger struggle. I want to move now from these place-based analysis to the theme of translocal justice bridge building. And in this part of my presentation, I'm going to ask how place-based struggles against extractive industries can be bridged, and what the potentials and challenges, but also potentials and challenges of that are. And what I mean by translocal bridge building, which might sound a little bit weird to you, is the idea to conceptualize and forge translocal connections between these different struggles. And the idea of translocality, or the proposition of translocality, is really to sort of strike a balance between acknowledging the place-based complexities, both in Groningen and Quetzaltenango, but also trying to understand what transversal connections can be made. So by asking this question, I would like to enthuse you to think critically, but also in a hopeful way, about translocal alliance building. And theoretically, this idea of bridging is inspired by environmental justice scholarships, which says that place-based movements, place-based resistance struggles, they benefit from alliances, and that that can generate different forms of counterpower. I bring these claims of environmental justice scholarship into conversation with critical geography scholarship that says we should nonetheless take a non-romanticizing stance on justice networks. And here I particularly draw on Cumbers et al., who propose a power and geographically sensitive analysis of converging movements, and they propose 7 analytical dimensions to do so. And for instance, they stress the importance of different place-based starting conditions of converging movements, or also say that the converging of movements might bring uneven benefits across place-based struggles. So to make this a bit more concrete, I would like to illustrate some of the potentials and tensions of translocal bridging to you by reading 3 quotes. First one, a Guatemalan social movement member told me, "We could think about twinning Guatemala and the Netherlands. That has weight in Guatemala and creates pressure. The elite do not like it when these issues are made public internationally. And international support can be useful given the increasing repression of dissent." So what this quote shows is, on the one hand, the potential of bridging in terms of creating visibility, of creating pressure, but it also stresses or shows to us this point around uneven benefits and the risk of converging for movements. Here, especially thinking about repression that was going on in Guatemala at the time. Second quote, a Dutch NGO practitioner who had been very much engaged in network building and also had been trying to link the Groningen struggle to other struggles told me, "If you look at elitist mining companies and local construction material extraction in Guatemala, that is much more difficult to connect with the case of Groningen. To find a common narrative is more difficult. Maybe international networks of support for both issues individually are more apt." So what this quote shows is really the importance, on the one hand, of finding an overarching framing and commonalities between struggles to bridge them, but it also raises the questions of scale. So what scalar alliances do we need to sort of strengthen place-based struggles? And this shows also that this proposition of translocal bridging might not always be the most intuitive, depending on the struggles we are looking at. And now the final quote. This is something a Groninger social movement member told me after they had been engaged in an exchange with activists from the Niger Delta, who were also affected by Shell's extraction, oil extraction in that case. "Beyond the similarities, there are also major differences. The democracy in the Netherlands is stable, there are courts that work, and livelihoods are more stable and less affected by extraction than, for example, in Nigeria." So what this quote shows is that bridging will always also reproduce the different geographical outsets among struggles, and that there might be differentiated perceptions of what bridging can bring in terms of generating counterpower among different struggles. And what this quote also shows is, or raises for me, is the question of movement identity. Because something I would like to stress is actually that the Groninger struggle, it has never been explicitly framed as an anti-extractive struggle. And the political strategies of the movement and different actors have been much more moderate in order to respond to the really depoliticized context in the Netherlands, and in order to speak to the state institution and extractive actors. It has been smart to not be too activist. So with these 3 quotes in mind, I would like to stress the potentials of bridging, but also raise issues around power, around difference, space, and scale, if we think about translocal bridge building. And I sort of wanted to stress how it might help generating counterpower, but how we also have to be mindful that it might perpetuate power imbalances between different place-based struggles. And to make you more curious, with Nienke Guadalupe, who will recognize some of the pictures, and also others, we co-created some bridges across the Netherlands and Guatemala. For instance, we engage in networking activities. We organize translocal field visits and also brought some Guatemalan counter mapping techniques to Groningen. And we are sort of currently reflecting on these experiences. And what we're trying to do through this reflection is really not to arrive to sort of a prescriptive model for bridge building between struggles, but we're just trying to learn from our experience and think how that can benefit both research and action. And now, to finish my presentation, I would like to leave you with some reflections on the issues of positionality and ethics, because obviously my whole research and also this idea of bridging is sort of rooted in a stance of solidarity with the different place-based struggles that I've been engaging in, but at the same time, there are also different positionalities at play, there are power dynamics, and also material and epistemic asymmetries, especially if we think about north-south and translocal bridging endeavors, and there might be contradictions and conflicts to it too. So to make this a bit more concrete and share with you some of the reflections and questions that sort of emerged for me as I reflected on positionality, was on the one hand this issue that I was really engaging with struggles that are deeply territorially rooted. And at the same time, I was rather territorially unrooted. And I was constantly thinking about how to overcome my distance to the struggles and also my privilege of sort of moving around. And then bridging sort of promotes this idea that there's a shared defense issues between struggles, no? But I've also shown what I've reflected on is that there might be a risk of oversimplification. So I mentioned this aspect of the Groninger struggle not being explicitly anti-extractive. And I also showed to you the issue of micropolitics in the case of the struggle in Quetzaltenango. And bridging sort of has this danger of making invisible these heterogeneities. And so the question for me is, who are we morally aligning with if we are building bridges, and who are we leaving out, and how can we account for this heterogeneity? Another important point for me to reflect on was how bridges can be built between territories that are really permeated by mistrust. That's something I've shown to you in both cases, that are permeated by insecurity, by instances of violence, and also political polarization. And then there are also reflections around not wanting to gloss over really fundamental differences between the cases of Groningen and Quetzaltenango, for instance, thinking about safety, thinking about ethnicity, thinking about the colonial history in Guatemala, thinking about questions of political access and political processes that were going on at the time. And one last point I want to raise in terms of positionality is that my approach of bridge building, it was really explicitly rooted in my positioning of being an activist researcher. But what I observed across places actually is that at times there was a really stark discomfort among my research participants, but also collaborators of calling what we were doing activist research, because I think in both cases there was sort of this technical legal dominance, and the struggles that I were engaging with, especially in Guatemala, there was a really strong desire to create hard factual and positivist research results that would be able to counter powerful expert truths. So that's something I also wanted to share with you. So I sort of would like to leave you with the questions that around what are the methodological and analytical choices that are most aligned with the struggles we are engaging in as scholars and as activists. And I hope you found these insights from Groningen, from Quetzaltenango and their bridging useful. And yeah, thank you for your attention, and looking forward to the discussion and the questions that we might receive.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah, for a very nice presentation with very relevant insights on and reflections on your research in both cases. Yeah, and you raise important questions, and those are also very good questions for the discussion. Interesting, what I find interesting is that you say that in the case of the land subsidence in Groningen, there was depoliticization, but there was also depoliticization in the movement. They didn't want to be called activists. But also in Guatemala, there is a sort of depoliticization in the sense that it's just too dangerous to speak out in a political sense, but also to show the internal struggles between different groups, the struggle against the same mining practices. So I think it's different types of depoliticization, but it's happening in different places. Yeah, so now I want to invite the two discussants. I propose first Nienke and then Guadalupe. The idea is to have 5 minutes each to reflect on your presentation. And of course, you both have also been involved in the research and action research, and bridging now presented. And after that, Hannah gets the word back to reflect on it. Meanwhile, anyone can put questions and comments in the Q&A. I see already there is one, but so while the discussion is unfolding, please put your questions and comments in the Q&A. Nienke, can I give the floor to you?
Yes. Well, first of all, Hannah, thank you very much for this presentation and for taking us along in your results, and for introducing me to this network. I think, yeah, it's a great opportunity for me to learn as well. And I think I wanted to start this discussion by first stressing the value of your research and how you did this. You already talked about the methodological issues you encountered. And from my work as a knowledge platform, I think this research is very important. The case of Groningen has for a long time been scientifically very much underreported. And I feel that your research, yeah, is quite important to get a wider public to know about what is happening here. One of the other things, what I feel that you really did during your research and what I think is very valuable is that you really started to engage yourself within the Dutch and Groninger community, trying to understand really what people experience, making connections with the different stakeholders. And I was also extremely pleased with the essay you wrote for our book. And I think for a lot of researchers, this is quite an example. We wrote a book, which is not a scientific publication, but it's more of like, yeah, more popular science. And I feel that these type of actions are very important for connecting local people also with research and its outcomes, especially when it concerns topics that are such as the water issue here that are very much understudied. So it really brings an extra layer to yeah, scientific work in this area. And then I wanted to reflect a bit on the multi-scalarity and also like linking these two cases. You already stressed the difficulty of doing that. Where can you find similarities and is it actually important? What I think is very important to stress here within the Dutch context is that this case from Groningen has been kept very small for a very long time. It has been seen as like a Dutch failure, a failure to address the earthquakes and to respond properly. There was a long time, there was this focus on the earthquakes, but recently with the parliamentary inquiry, we actually discovered much more the geopolitical context and how these different interests internationally were involved in really crucial decision making. And more I feel also that linking it like to fossil fuel and extractivist industries is highly valuable to understand decision making processes and drawing attention to the issues that come out of it. And what I see in the discussions we have had recently with Guadalupe and you on our paper is like that we find ourselves really in this power struggle within the realm of how do you, as a researcher, also relate to these issues? How can you, being embedded within the society you study, how can you maintain your own independence? And then I think I want to discuss a bit about this translocal bridging. You show different quotes, which I think stress quite, make clear the different challenges there are towards translocal bridging. And I think what is interesting in the case of Groningen, which is not necessarily reflected in the quotes, but what I really see as a struggle here is that within the Netherlands itself, it is already quite difficult to explain what is going on. In one of our discussions, we said like Groningen is like if you have the global south and the global north, that like Groningen is the global south within the north. Meaning that there is such a distance to from The Hague to Groningen, from where the policy decisions are being made, and this distance is really much felt. So it is very hard for resistant movements to really explain what the issues are. This issue, this problem in Groningen around the gas extraction has already been going on for 10 years, making it also that people get tired of it, which is really big element in the possibilities to explain what is going on. And every time new policies are introduced, new problems arise, making it difficult. And next to that, there is the solidarity issue in Groningen, which is really difficult because of this temporal element. A lot of communities and a lot of residents individually receive different types of compensations, making also that there is a lot of social conflict among these people within villages, but also different approaches in these different villages, leading to issues of unequal compensation, making socioeconomic struggles more apparent. And then I want to end this also with, again, this temporal element. We talked about multi-scalarity, about approaching these issues from like a wider view, maybe also including different insights from different case studies. And I think this is like, it's very important. And then the question I'm left with, I think, is how this temporal element, how can you study these type of issues over a certain period of time, and how does it do justice to the research that we are doing? I feel that as a platform, we have a sort of like a collective memory function, which is very important. And this memory, as researchers, I feel is also very important to have in order to understand the struggles people have. And I wonder like how you look towards this temporal element of doing a PhD and being still continue to be connected to the case.
Thank you very much, Nienke. Also for bringing in the time element to the difficult and complex question of bridging. I now want to give the floor to Guadalupe for her reaction.
Thank you, Jeroen. Thank you, Hannah and Nienke. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to speak about this. I think, well, like my first, I think, comment is that we are bridging across something that is vital for everyone, that is water. I think that this is something that unites us like in an ecological way. Like I think Groningen struggles with water differently, but I think what we are seeing is how extractive activities are disrupting water cycles in different forms. And I think that's something that we can like, it's our main flaw, I think. And with that dynamics like disrupted by extractive industries, we're also facing like these techno fixes and these technical discourses that somehow put a lot of imbalances of information between the local communities that are affected and between the local governments and also the companies. Like I think that's something that we are facing in all these cases, like these imbalances of access to information, to manage how technical discourses are validated, and who's going to have like this positive truth about what the communities are living, like these water dynamics disruptions, you know. So I think that's something that we are facing in these different contexts, and that the research in this place, it plays a special role, like Ninke said, like about memory, about something that living in a territory, living in a space is not something that is just disconnected from the history of the place. We're seeing territories as these complex, not only ecological way, but also cultural ways that coexist in these spaces. And when we are facing this with an extractive activity, what we are seeing is this movement of resistance, this contestants of power. And I think that's one that, well, I think it's different ways how people organize around reacting to these extractive industries. Like Hannah said, or maybe sometimes they do not identify as anti-extractivist activities, but sometimes the context demands it, because it's not just a problem that is only locally, but we're saying that it's a global problem. And I think that's something that translocal bridging has helped us in the research work, is that we are seeing that these sharing and understanding how extractive practices unfolds in different political spectrums are really important to understand, because that's when we see the similarities of how these different companies treat the different local governments and the more broader national, the broad political context also. And I also think that that's something that maybe be a discussion that is more profound about the global north, like how the global south has more unstable political regimes, and that these extractive activities can have more interference with local democracy than maybe can have in the north. And that's why we are seeing here more criminalization, more using justice to silence these movements. I think that that's some major difference that maybe we can discuss further. Maybe Hannah can react to that, but I think that that's also part of what Ninke was saying about the cycle of politics, how extractivist activities interact with this cycle of politics in the different levels. And maybe for finishing, for me, I think to being a researcher trying to address this extractive power dynamics, and also being a researcher from the global south, but also being in a privileged position from those who are in the local territories. For me, these bridging activities are important in the terms that we are, this is a multi-scalar strategy that we should have as researchers, and that our role, and well, maybe the possibilities we have to have these bridging connections make us more responsible for being part of that strategy. That is, I think that local problems are important, but also see it in the global scale. It's important because these activities work that way. They are not just local actors. They are global actors and multi-scalar strategies that they have. So we also should have that multi-scalarity strategy in order to address all these struggles in the different ways, from research to political action, I think. And in that between, maybe you could call that an activist. Well, I don't know, but I think that will be my comment for Hannah's presentation. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Guadalupe. Thank you for bringing in water as a way to bridge the cases, but also mentioning that it is necessary to have this multi-scalar activism to also face the multi-scalar extractivist activities. I now give the floor to Hannah to react to the two reflections.
Yes, I will try to not to react for too long, so we still have some time for questions if there are any. I think something that really sort of resonated with me was what you, Nienke, said about that sometimes it seems almost unclear what the struggle in Groningen is really about. So the issues are so complex. Is it about fossil fuels? Is it about water, what we are not even talking about? Is it about state institutions and their compensations and reparations? And I think linking it a little bit to this idea of bridging is also to recenter it a little bit about fossil fuels, because the compensations are now in the public hand and handled by the public hand. So sometimes it's also something that you had shared with me. We tend to forget that it was these extractive actors that have caused, together with the Dutch state, what is happening in Groningen. So that's, I think, something really interesting to reflect about. And then I thought what's really interesting is what you mentioned about collective memory and how to have that memory of what's happening in Groningen. And I think the work that you're doing as a platform of tracking the developments over such a long time now already is really, really important, especially giving or seeing this fatigue among many people that have been mobilizing at times, but that are also not able to sort of keep up with that forever. And really also, acknowledging and remembering what has happened in Groningen. And I do feel connected to Groningen in a special way, because that was also sort of my entry into the Netherlands. And I think that has also shaped how I see the Netherlands, because, okay, now I'm based in Amsterdam, but if you really experience first the Groninger reality and see all the things that have been going on there, that sort of, that shapes your view. And I obviously pretty much wish to stay connected to what's going on there and try to keep up with that. But then I also have like these different, you have like different temporal scales, right, of what your PhD research is, but then your engagement can also be different, perhaps on a different sort of scale and be there for longer. And then responding to Guadalupe, I think what was really interesting as a first point was this connection of the cases through water. It's really interesting how actually in both cases, water is sort of depoliticized for different reasons, but we still see the same patterns. I didn't go into details on that in the case of Quetzaltenango, but also there's the sort of the same discourses at play around the flooding issues that have been created by the mining. So it's said that the flooding issues have been created by climate change and heavy rains and so on, and the mining sort of is invisibilized. And I think that's something interesting to connect and also sort of ally around and connect the cases around. And then I think something really important and something that I've also tried to sort of highlight in my presentation are these translocal bridges that are built between the north and south, if we want to stay in this terminology, and really acknowledging also, yes, structural inequalities, for instance, and looking a little bit more like under the surface, also the different forms of violence that might be at play. So really this direct violence and criminalization that's at play in Quetzaltenango, for instance. And then also symbolic violence that for me is happening in Groningen too in many ways. So I think it's interesting to see how to connect across cases and still allow for these nuances and still see what the different struggles sort of bring to the tables. And something that also resonated with me was what you said about multi-scalar strategies sort of also being or connecting being a strategy in order to identify patterns and to sort of challenge the same things that are going on in different territories in different ways, but that we're still sort of seeing similar things happening. And I think that's been very valuable also for us, the three of us, and more broadly to exchange about connecting really dissimilar cases in many ways. So I want to leave it at that. If there are any questions in the chat, I don't know.
Yes, we have questions. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Nienke. Thank you, Guadalupe, for the start of this discussion. I think it's already raising a lot of very important points and questions and reflections. So please, for everybody, you can type your questions or reflections, comments in the Q&A. There already are 3 issues raised. Abelardo raises 2 questions. One is related to the territorial governance, and the other one to property rights and of indigenous groups. But actually, I want to start with the question of Bibiana that is very concrete, asking Guadalupe about what concrete benefit the social movements in Guatemala has obtained from the bridging and knowing about the Groningen case. So could you be specific on, was it more, let's say, the sense of solidarity, or was it specific strategies that you learned from Groningen, or was it more seeing similarities in the mechanisms of extractive industries? So I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Well, maybe I think what I was seeing is that the first and most important thing we got about from bridging, I think, is, well, the human relationships that we got from it. I think that it is important also, and we have discussed this with Hannah and Nienke, like how we are like in the same struggles as researchers, trying to understand how to put our work and our research in service of what the local communities want. And I think that's something that we definitely have as a result of this bridging. I think something that when I get the opportunity last year to go to Groningen and to see the houses there and how they were damaged, about all these impacts about the gas extraction, and it made me think, like, in the end, what we are seeing in both cases is that local livelihoods, even though they are really different in both places, and they have different culture rooted in each of them, people have been displaced over these extractive activities in some ways. And they have to change their lives, their life projects, because of these extractive activities. So I think that's something that we can see it in the term of empathy. So I think that's something that also was awakening me in this, like, exchange. But also seeing myself, like, in the mirror of them also as researchers in different contexts, like seeing the knowledge platform in Groningen and learning how they are trying to address local politics. I think it's also an inspiration for our movements here. And I think, like I was saying, I think something that is really important is this understanding of how these extractive activities change everything in the ecosystem, not only culturally and in the lives of people, but also in the landscape, and how, yeah, water dynamics at the end are being affected. I think that for me, that's the most important thing seeing there. And well, I think there's a lot of more connections between Guatemala and the Netherlands in different ways about extractivism. For example, we also discussed during the time there that about how these new, like, like this transition we are facing to leaving fossil fuels, gas behind, and moving into different ways of dealing with energy, and how this is all connected. I think that for me will be an answer, yeah.
Thank you very much, Guadalupe. And actually, yeah, the same question for Nienke. So what contribution did the bridging and knowing about the Guatemala case bring for the Groningen movement against the effects of the gas extraction?
Yeah, I was still muted. Yeah, it's a good question, and I really like to hear your answers, Guadalupe, from your perspective, to see how it informed you and how it's also an inspiration. And the same goes for me. Like I really highly value our conversations about it, especially about our positionality. But also knowing more about your work has really inspired me. You gave a workshop on counter mapping. And that has been very inspirational, something that as a platform that we could maybe really implement, maybe with professionals who we also work closely together with, in order to understand the scalar perspective of what is going on in the different villages. And I think one of the things that really struck me as like the parallel talking about these multi-scalar strategies of companies is really the intransparency. And we had quite an interesting conversation about it, how to deal with that, and also how as a researcher, especially you, Guadalupe, in Guatemala, position yourself in this struggle of getting transparent knowledge and information about what is going on. And for a long time, and I still feel that that's the case in Groningen, this is a very important topic to address, the need for transparency in this case.
Thank you, Nienke, for your answer. Perhaps giving the word to Hannah, what was actually your hope for the bridging, and what was the largest challenge? If you hear now their reactions on what was important for them, what worked, but what for you was actually something you hoped for and was difficult to attain?
Yeah, I think it's really inspiring for me to hear these reflections, and it's been really inspiring both to exchange a lot with Guadalupe and with Nienke on the place-based things that are going on and processes that are going in, and then trying to connect very different contexts. And it's been also really interesting to hear from them, also knowing that they've been sort of engaged in other networking activities. Guadalupe, for instance, with other Latin American networks, and Nienke last year, I think, went to a case in Sweden that is also experiencing earthquakes as a consequence of extraction. So seeing all these linkages and connections, I think there's a lot to say about what I wanted to do and then what actually came out. But I think one aspects that perhaps I can raise or I can share is that in the beginning, when I started brainstorming and thinking about bridging with other people, there was also this proposition of really generating visibility for the different territories, for everything that was going on there. And then sort of understanding how visibility, for example, can be challenging or maybe not the best way to go for different reasons. We talked about the fatigue among many Groningers and their struggle, and they have made their struggle visible, connecting with other movements at times, connecting with international arenas at times, but also then sort of the fatigue that results after some times, and thinking, when are these moments of visibility useful for movements and when not, perhaps. And then, I shared with you the issue of violence and also repression in Guatemala, and perhaps it was not the best strategy to make visible certain things, though the movement became visible even in international arenas at times. But then following from that, many of the protesters were criminalized. So reflecting on this aspect, for instance, I think that's been very interesting for me, and sort of a challenge, and then thinking what other bridges can be built, and what has emerged. And sometimes that was really surprising, and sort of staying open, I guess, in the process of moving around and seeing what resonates. And I think, for instance, counter mapping resonated well, because I think that's something that's really impactful in Guatemala. But then also, actually, the Groningen movement has been really successful in their counter mapping all the gas quakes that were going on, really generating transparency. So I think there are also these links and strategies that are very useful across context. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, mentioning the violence in Guatemala, actually Stu had a question, because you mentioned already were also forms of violence in the case of Groningen. Could you give some examples of what you're talking about in the case of Groningen when you talk about violence?
I just noticed I had muted myself. I hope you can hear me now. Well, I think in the case of Guatemala, I gave this very obvious example of violence by different actors, and that is sort of used to silence protesters, for instance. But I think we can also understand violence perhaps in a wider sense. And I think many of the things that have been happening in Groningen are violent in one way or the other. Like thinking, for instance, back to the whistleblowers that I have mentioned, and how they were ridiculed at the time, how they were sort of not taken seriously and sort of publicly shamed. For me, that's also a form of violence. And also all the psychological consequences for people, I think that's also a form of violence that has been really triggered by the gas extraction. So I think there's much more to this. And also sometimes these discourses that are at play in Groningen about national energy security, and we need the gas for that, and completely invisibilizing the sort of the interests and the needs and the lives of Groningers at the time. And then also thinking, for instance, about issues of social cohesions and what the compensation policies have created. So I think there's a lot to say about forms of violence in Groningen too. I would be curious to hear Nienke also, but not sure.
Yeah, I would love to respond quickly on that, because I fully agree with you that there are different types of violence. And one of the concept that I really like to use to explain this is like the concept of slow violence, which is like the insidious form of, also coming back to this temporary aspect, that over time makes that people have indeed health impacts, or cannot choose the things that they want to choose in their life, and change the course of their life because of it. It has to do, with different forms. And I think that concept explains it very well. And maybe to add to that, I do have, I think what is, Guadalupe, you reminded me of that, because what is happening here in Groningen as well is that the energy transition is now also very much directed and focused on Groningen. For me, this slow violence also links to the fact that within politics, Groningen is often looked for as the energy province, and it should also help to make this transition to a more sustainable world possible. And that makes that people still need to fight for their territories. They need to fight against the placement of giant windmills. Just recently, the Ministry of Defense wanted to build a big ammunition depot here in Groningen, and people continue to feel the need to resist this in politics and need to explain them. And I think that you can also maybe explain as a type of slow violence.
Yeah, thank you, Nienke. I'm looking at the time, We are already 9 minutes past the programmed ending of this webinar. I think let's close with one last question before handing the words to Catharina to have the real closure, but perhaps a last question based on the question of the two questions of Abelardo, which were about indigenous rights and territorial governance. A question to all three of you. So are there from the bridging activities things that you see that inspired you to think of different ways of this territorial governance or mobilizing legal action that you learned from the other case? Perhaps if we can end with some answers on that, then we have covered the questions in the Q&A, and I think that would be a nice closure of the webinar.
I think I would pass this perhaps to Guadalupe, who's really closely working, for instance, with lawyers also and on legal strategies. Would be interesting to hear.
Well, I think the local strategies are always connecting the research. Well, for our case, and I think that that's why Hannah passed the question to me, is that well, like the research here in Guatemala have served to like support these local struggles, but in a way also in a legal way. So most of the research we do, we handle it to lawyers in order to them to, with this information, with this yeah, also like evidence of violence, evidence of violations of the local laws that regulates mining or oil, and trying to address these issues that sometimes goes by because there's like this bureaucracy, like shadow on the things, and that's something also that Ninke said. When you brought transparency, you also brought all these issues of illegalities, illegalities, sometimes things that are not regulated, but also you can see that there has been a systematic violation of different rights. And some things that we, even though there's rights, there is, for example, the indigenous consultation with the IOL 69 convention. There's also, if you do not ask and if you do not are like constantly seeing that the states respect your rights, they're not going to be respected. So I think for us, research and this is going to, in a way, to unearthing these rights that had been obscured by this bureaucracy and extractive patterns of the industry. Yeah.
Thank you, Guadalupe. I think it resonates with the pressuring the Dutch government for rightful compensation and reinforcement of houses in Groningen. Ninke, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I think, well, I was listening to Guadalupe, and I think this rights perspective is indeed very important. One of the reasons why this massive reinforcement operation here in Groningen is indeed going on is because of the safety standards that are not met, and that is really something that is now, the operation is in full swing. But at the same time, I feel that within this operation, a lot of other maybe human rights or very like principles of how you would do that are also violated in the process itself, which is quite interesting. And I think the contact with Guadalupe made me more aware of that and more interested in understanding these international frameworks on human rights, on forced displacement, for example. And there is a whole literature on corporate social responsibility. And here in Groningen, it's a bit opaque because it's done by the government, but at the same time, we discussed this, there is this private component to it. But that's definitely something that I want to look into more, on how that is actually legally done, and how you can also, through understanding that, maybe draw attention to certain issues.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nienke. Yeah, I think it's very interesting that some concepts or narrative or discourses you don't associate with a case. Like in Groningen, you would not talk about displacement, but actually a lot of people are forced out of their houses for many, many years because they get a new house or their house is unsafe. So there is displacement, but that term is not used. But by reflecting or looking into the mirror, like Guadalupe said, that actually helps to see those links and those things happening. Okay, I want to thank you very much, all of you, Hannah, Nienke, and Guadalupe, and I hand now the floor to Katarina for announcing the next seminar and webinar.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Jeroen, for the wonderful moderation, and to Hannah for her seminar, and Nienke, Guadalupe for the very insightful discussion. I learned a lot, and I'm very happy to witness all these research endeavors that you're all doing. It's great and very informative. So thank you so much. And the next one actually will be in 2 weeks with Javier Rodriguez Ross. This time speaking about spatialities of water reallocation in river basin governance, and in the case of the Segura River Basin, which is in southern Spain. There will be discussions by Marta Garcia Moya with remarks from his PhD supervisor, Professor Francois Moll. Then I always invite you to visit our website to see the schedule of the webinars. We are going towards the end of the seminar series, expected by December of this year. And of course, if you have missed any of the previous seminars or would like to rewatch it, you can do so in our YouTube channel. I will also take the opportunity to thank once again the members of the network, in particular our host institutions, the partner organizations, and of course the funding agency, which is the European Union, and invite you all to follow us through our social media channels. Thank you everybody for following us today. Also many thanks to our interpreter, Francisco, who stayed until the end of the session and gave us the opportunity to also follow it in Spanish. So with my pleasure, I close the session for today, and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.